Today commemorates the signing of the International Religious Freedom Act. The act, signed in 1998, condemns behaviors that violate religious freedom and ensures the United States' dedication to promoting and protecting religious freedoms on a global scale. And joining me now to discuss is Eric Patterson, Executive Vice President at the Religious Freedom Institute. Eric, welcome back. Great to see you.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the significance of today. You know, a lot of us here in the United States sort of take that freedom for granted, but in a lot of other countries in the world, they don't have religious freedom.
That's right. Around the world, as much as 80% of the world's population live in places where there's a high level of religious persecution. So it's something that's in our DNA as Americans, even before the First Amendment, but it isn't something that most people in most places have.
And we just talked about Sudan right before you and I started talking. I know that's been a country of particular concern for you all. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is?
Well, certainly. Sudan, starting in the 1980s, had very, very oppressive Islamist laws that were directed at its populace, and not just the Christian or other minorities, but including its own population. In just the past 18 months, there's been this democratic turn in Sudan that's been supported by the U.S. and others, and there's just been a lot of hope that things are getting better as there's been the rule of law and democracy in Sudan. So the past 48 hours, to see the country in turmoil again is very, very disheartening.
Yeah, and another country that we're seeing in a lot of turmoil right now is Afghanistan. We're hearing from the international community that they're watching it, anticipating maybe a total collapse under Taliban rule. Let's talk a little bit about that and maybe, you know, what that may imply for religious minorities such as Christians living in Afghanistan.
Well, the situation in Afghanistan is very dire, and there's no one-size-fits-all because there's no single Taliban. What happens in Kabul isn't necessarily what happens in other parts of the country. The Taliban is factionalized. And then you also have a terrorist group, ISIS-K, attacking the Taliban, attacking others. So if you're a Christian or other aid worker, you're at risk. If you're part of the 15,000 or so Christian minority Afghan citizens there, you're at terrible risk. If you're part of the Shia minority, which is 3 to 4 million of the population, you're at risk. We've seen attacks against that group. And of course, Christians have long suffered in Afghanistan. So when the U.S. abandoned the country in August, it really put people in the crosshairs of the Taliban and others.
Yeah, it's such a concerning situation. And of course, those two countries that we just talked about aren't the only ones. Can you talk about maybe some of the other countries that are on your radar when it comes to maybe religious persecution?
Yeah, when I look around the world, I look, where are there places where the government represses Christianity or other faiths, and where are there places with high social hostility towards religion? So for instance, China goes after its Muslim Uyghur minority, it goes after Christians, it goes after Tibetan Buddhists, it goes after any group that has an allegiance higher than the state or than the Communist Party. Around the world, of course, Christians are the most likely to be repressed. We look at that in Pakistan and in specific in Nigeria. You know, last year, over 4,000 Christians were murdered in Nigeria, largely because they're Christians. And they're of a different ethnic group, they're of a different religious affiliation in the middle belt of the country. So that's a country of deep concern to us. In fact, the U.S. government, for the first time in December of 2020, cited it as a country of particular concern under this Religious Freedom Act.
You know, I want to talk a little bit more about that because, you know, people are probably listening to this and wondering, geez, what can I do? What's the United States doing? You know, maybe what's your organization doing? We hear how awful it is, but what are the steps being taken to stop this?
Yeah, well, under this act, the U.S. is supposed to act. We have an ambassador for religious freedom. We have an office at the State Department on religious freedom. We have a separate commission on religious freedom. Our diplomats are supposed to get annual training on religious freedom. But it is hard. It's hard to change the conditions in the world. Where we've had the biggest success is when a president intervenes and an individual or a family is released. So the most famous case recently being President Trump seeing the Pastor Brunson released in Turkey. Those are the real successes. I'd say the other big U.S. success is getting other Western countries to sign on board religious freedom. So the UK now has a special envoy for international religious freedom. The EU does. So as we've brought other countries into the fight, that's the success. We haven't really changed China. We haven't changed Pakistan. And the way to do that really is to convince them that it's in their interests to protect all of their citizens, not just some of them.
Yeah, I want to talk about successes, if we can kind of pick up on that. What successes have you seen in other countries? Have other countries maybe changed their ways a little bit when it comes to religious freedom or persecution?
Yeah, the places where we see the best modest successes often a smaller country where government elites decide that if we get on the Western human rights agenda, that'll be in our interests. And so Vietnam has been a place that has enforced some of its government officials to go to rule of law training that includes religious freedom training. Another country is Uzbekistan, who just in the last couple of years has done the same kind of halting steps towards allowing its religious minorities to have a voice, recognizing them in often in academic or scholarly circles. But those are some of those first steps that can lead towards a wider opening by normalizing religious pluralism in a country.
We don't have a lot of time left. I'm going to pivot here just for a minute. We've been seeing really a rise in vandalism at Catholic churches and sites, and also an increase in anti-Semitism here in the United States. I'm wondering, I want to get your thoughts on that, and also, what do you think is spurring this and the dangers of what we're seeing?
Well, certainly there's been a rise in anti-Semitism in the last couple of years, more attacks than ever before. And the attacks, particularly on Catholic churches, they're easy to target, right? They're in urban centers, stained glass, icons and things have made them targets. Part of the reason they were targets last year during COVID is because last summer there were so many riots in urban areas associated with BLM and other things. I don't think it was a targeting of the theology, the faith. It was a targeting of churches as centers of truth and as centers of authority in those areas. And so they've been recast as symbols of oppression. And it really is a terrible thing when you think about not only is the message of Christ to love your neighbor as yourself, but also that these are bastions of hope and charity. And so it is a real problem. We've just launched a new initiative to gather the data to finalize a report on this for the U.S. government.
What do you think can be done about it?
Well, the first and the most important thing is Christians need to be winsome neighbors, defending the faith, defending their right to be in the public square, to make religious arguments and to do religious work. That's the first thing. And then the second is we really need to be pushing on government officials to take this type of violence seriously. It seems like in the last 18 months we've looked at certain types of violence and totally neglected the dramatic urban violence that was directed first against government buildings and then second against houses of worship.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.